Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook?
Hello and welcome to today's Fleet Geeks podcast. I'm in the amazing Weightmans offices in Colmore Row, and I'm overlooking a beautiful Birmingham landscape. It's very, very lovely. We need to make sure we get a photo, by the way. And I'm joined today by some awesome guests. We're going to be recording a series of podcasts today, and we'll be releasing them over the coming weeks. And I'm joined today by James Muller, who's a Principal Associate in the Health and Safety team here at Weightmans, as well as Sarah Jennings, Associate in the Transport Regulatory team. I need to make sure my teeth are properly in there. And a bit later on, I'm going to introduce you to John Paul, which will be very interesting as well, because we're going to be talking with him about commercial litigation side of the business and contractual disputes. But for now, we're going to focus on the health and safety side of your business. So I'm going to just ask James and Sarah to quickly introduce themselves to warm their voices up. So Sarah, would you like to go first?
Yeah, hi, thanks Pete. I'm Sarah Jennings, as Pete said, an associate in the Transport Reg team, and my day-to-day normally looks like this: anything in front of the Traffic Commissioner. So any public inquiries, preliminary hearings, any assistance with DBSA investigations, I'm probably helping you with something like that.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And how long have you been with the Weightmans team now?
I've been at Weightmans for 7 years, Pete. Yeah, over 7 years actually, more like 7.5, almost 8. So yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But don't tell anyone how old I am.
I would never ask. I would never even ask. And I've no idea, Sarah. You don't look old enough to have been here that long.
Not a day over 21.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
That's what I tell myself anyway.
Exactly. Awesome. Sarah, thank you for joining us today. James, over to you. Can you introduce yourself for the team, please?
Of course. So good afternoon, Pete. I'm James Muller. I'm a Principal Associate in Weightmans Health and Safety team. I represent businesses, organisations of all sizes, usually following accidents, often fatal or serious accidents involved in the business. So helping them respond to HSE or local authority or police investigations, and representing them right through sometimes to prosecution, including Crown Court proceedings, criminal prosecutions, etc. And we also do some advisory work, helping businesses understand their duties so that they can try and avoid those sorts of things happening. So it's really that sort of one-two punch.
Awesome. Sarah and James, absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. So today, the first health and safety episode today, we're talking really about the role of safety as more than just a driving element for those fleet geeks who are listening, potentially transport managers, responsible people on operator licenses. James, I'm going to bring you in here. Tell me a bit more about what the duties and requirements are on certainly a business in the transport and fleet sector, because there's more than just the operator licensing element that we often really focus on.
Absolutely. So what I always invite businesses to do is consider the general duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act. There are numerous specific regulations, health and safety regulations, but everything almost always goes back to the two general duties. So they're the duties under Section 2 and Section 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. So Section 2 is the duty to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health, safety and welfare of your employees. And Section 3 is a sort of similar parallel duty to ensure that your undertaking doesn't expose non-employees to risk to health and safety. And that non-employees can still be workers, so they might be agency workers who aren't employees. They might be third-party drivers who are on site, etc. Or it could be members of the public as well. So that Section 3 includes both of those.
Awesome. Okay. And with those duties, who is it that's responsible? Is it the company itself, or is it the transport manager? Is it the director, shareholders? Who is it? Particularly, I've come across a company we've been working with recently, and we're seeing it more and more with non-exec directors, for example. So where is the burden of responsibility?
Yeah, so the responsibility, the duty, is owned by the employer. So 99 times out of 100, that's going to be the company. And those duties are what are called non-delegable duties. So once the employer owes those duties, it cannot delegate those to any specific person. Now, of course, a company can't do anything itself. It doesn't have arms and legs. And so it can assign people within the business to undertake various roles and responsibilities to ensure that the company discharges the duty. And of course, it will assign certain things to the health and safety manager, certain things maybe to the fleet manager, certain things to various operational managers. But the duty remains that of the employer. And so the company doesn't discharge its duty simply by saying, well, that is the responsibility of person X or Y. And so that means that the senior management of the company have always got to ensure that the organisation, the business as a whole, is discharging those duties, rather than simply thinking that by putting a particular thing into someone's job description, or by saying in the health and safety policy that a particular aspect is the responsibility of a particular person, that it's done everything it needs to, because it hasn't. And similarly, you talked about specific individuals. The company owes duties. There are different ways as well by which senior managers and directors can be found liable as well in relation to breaches by the company. So the company would owe the primary duty and could be prosecuted, but managers can be prosecuted alongside it as well. Senior managers, that is, and directors, those who sort of decide the strategy level, rather than people who are sort of putting that into practice.
Okay, cool. Thank you, James. Sarah, I'm going to bring you in on this. So just a question related to particularly the transport manager's role in this instance. How do you see, obviously the transport manager has a real duty under the operator licensing regime, but how would you see their role as a manager within this framework for health and safety?
Well, that was exactly what I was thinking about, actually, and how whilst James says those roles can't be derogated out and things like that, I think very much with the operator licensing regime, there's two very separate jobs, aren't there? There's the job of the company, which holds the operator's license, and there's a job of the transport manager, who is also independent to that, because they sign up to their duties with the traffic commissioner when they get specified on the license, and they're very much their duties that they have to abide by, if you like. They have to have that continuous and effective control, which differs quite a lot, actually, to what James has told us about in the health and safety world. So I think it's very important that transport managers and people that are working within fleet understand the difference and kind of join up with health and safety, so that responsibilities are understood properly, because there could be, I suppose, a risk of a transport manager going, well, that's my job, I signed up to this when I got specified on this licence, so this is all I'm going to do. And actually they need to do quite a lot of other things, probably, for the business, in a health and safety aspect, and in a HR aspect, in lots of different aspects, that will also fall under their remit, but might not be what they signed up to when they specified on the licence.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. I think there's the interesting thing about the transport or fleet manager's role, compliance managers, wherever you look at it, there is this need to be able to collaborate with those different departments, particularly with safety as well. And I think at certain times there's going to be some level of duty and responsibility for the transport manager as well.
Definitely.
James, when we were speaking before we sort of clicked record on the microphone, you mentioned something called reverse burden. Are you able to just introduce that concept for the listeners, please?
Yeah. So people will be aware, sort of from their general lives, of this concept of you're innocent until proven guilty in English law. And people may assume that the same would be the case if the HSE or local authority decided to bring proceedings for breach of health and safety legislation. And they would be wrong if they thought that. Once in proceedings under the Health and Safety at Work Act, once the prosecution has proven that there is a risk, and a risk is really easy to prove. If there has been an accident, clearly there was a risk. But once the prosecution has proven that, then the burden flips on any defendant, so any company, to prove its own innocence then. So to prove that it reduced that risk so far as reasonably practicable. And so it's one of the few situations in English law where the defendant has to prove their innocence. And so what that means is that any business is going to have to show that it reduced that risk so far as reasonably practicable, rather than simply undermining allegations that it hasn't done that. And so that means it's going to be a really big reliance on paperwork and on you being able to prove that X, Y, or Z has happened. So I hear a lot of businesses when we speak after accidents, and they'll say, well, we know this has happened, or we know we've trained them in this, but they cannot prove it because their paperwork is deficient. And then it becomes really difficult for us to discharge that reverse burden, to prove that business has trained those people, for instance, because we bear the burden of proving that. So it's a real, I mean, people always say paperwork can't make you safe, and that is true. But when we're defending health and safety proceedings after there has been an accident, paperwork is really important. It makes the job so much easier to show what has been put in place, what's been done, if we've got that level of paperwork. And if we haven't, we're really on the back foot.
Sure. And I just want to pick up on something I hear regularly when I speak to operators and transport managers and those kinds of things, and they would say, but it's just common sense, isn't it? Or it's their fault, laying blame at the employee's door.
Almost every single case we get involved in, the proximate cause, the last thing that happened was that an employee did something really stupid. That's almost always the case. And so a sort of narrow approach, and that approach, and you hear it, as you say, you hear it from people all the time, it would be to think, well, that's what's caused the accident. And I guess the duty is to ensure that safety so far as reasonably practicable. So one of the aspects of that is that you've got to stop your employees doing things that are stupid, because it is foreseeable that they will do things that are stupid.
Easier said than done, James, I think.
well, it is. And most of the cases we deal with, again, is how have we stopped them doing things that are stupid. But there's various reasons why they might do that. They might be under time pressure.
Sure.
They might not be fully aware of the risks. There may be competing priorities. There could be a culture of non-compliance. I'm sure we've all seen businesses where, if you put on all of your PPE in the correct manner, someone would take the mick out of you or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
And so, but you have to put in place all of those things almost to protect the employees from themselves. And that involves directing them on what to do, that involves training them on what to do, that involves monitoring whether they are actually doing it or not, that involves corrective actions if they're not doing those things, whether that be disciplinary or retraining, and also reviewing your systems. If you've got particular areas where compliance is proving difficult, thinking, well, are we addressing this in the best way that we can? If loads of people are falling foul of this particular issue, can we design a better way of addressing that risk?
And do you know what I'm thinking about there with things like bridge strikes? How often I see that actually the root cause following a full investigation was the driver just wasn't paying attention. So many times. But then when you look into it, and obviously slightly different to like perhaps the health and safety requirements on this, but you look into it and you see, what seemed to be quite a minor incident, or what you think was, and company says to me all the time, it's just a minor incident, just hit a bridge, no one died. And it turns out, actually, we didn't really have any routing policy in place. We didn't really tell drivers how to get from A to B or really help them with that. And actually, we didn't give them any maps either. We just thought they knew the way everywhere. And that's where I think sometimes people fall short, because they think they have the process in place, but actually there's so much more that can be done to help. And I think it's the right thing to do, isn't it? Despite the regulations, it's also just the right thing to do by your employees, isn't it? Or your workers,
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy. With expert development for fleet leaders, we offer fully accredited initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
Awesome. So absolutely. Yeah. So what tips have we got? What should we do if a fleet manager sat there listening? What suggestions do you have for them?
So the first thing is to, you've got to assess what the risks are in your business. And I know a lot of businesses will get someone external in to do risk assessments. I'm not saying that is not the correct way to do it, but that creates a problem, because you need someone who understands how the business operates to assess the risks involved in it. And one of the common issues we see is generic risk assessments done by external people, or even done by a central part of the business for lots of different sites, and it actually doesn't fit when you look at the paperwork and those particular operations. They don't marry up. So one of the top tips would be understand what is actually going on in the business, how that work is being conducted, how people want to conduct that work, before you even then can start to consider the risks associated with that. And that might involve talking to people in the business, understanding their priorities and how those competing priorities have an effect on the behaviour of the workers. If you're telling people they've got to meet certain time requirements, then they are going to naturally want to do things to speed up their job, and you've got to factor that in as part of the whole system for ensuring safety.
Awesome. Okay. And what are the risks of cocking out then?
Good question. So breaches of health and safety legislation are criminal in nature. So there will be claims for compensation if people are injured, etc., and civil claims, but there is also potential criminal sanction for breaches of health and safety legislation. So that can be criminal prosecutions against the business. As I referenced earlier, there can be criminal prosecutions against senior managers and directors. Potentially, there can be prosecutions against individuals as well. They are much, and lower down individuals, they are far less common. And for those reasons we've talked about, that it's part of the business's job to protect those individuals from themselves. But that also exists. And if you're convicted of one of those, then you get a criminal record. Companies can get a criminal record. Companies often have to declare any criminal convictions on big tenders as part of their pre-qualification questionnaires. So if you're doing work on big tenders for big sort of multinational companies particularly, or for public sector, that can be really important. That you've got that conviction that can cause real problems with getting contracts. And then there are fines as part of that criminal conviction for companies, and those often now run into millions of pounds. It's based slightly on the turnover of the company, so bigger fines for bigger organisations. The idea is that regardless of the level of fine, it will send a message to the shareholders. That's the sort of underlying premise. So the fines are meant to be big, they are meant to hurt. And then for individuals, So for those health and safety offences we've talked about, up to 2 years in prison.
Wow.
For directors, managers, or individuals.
And that does happen, right? People do go to prison for health and safety breaches, right?
They do, yes. Certainly, if you're convicted of an individual offence as an individual, the vast majority result in some form of prison sentence. That can be suspended, or that can be immediate. It's probably around 50-50 at the moment. And certainly we are seeing a sea change, or a trend at least, towards more immediate custodial sentences for breaches of health and safety legislation for managers. Or we certainly were before we had the current prison crisis. That there may be a little bit of a blip in that trend at the moment, but certainly the general trend is towards holding managers to account, senior managers, directors to account, and towards custodial sentences where they've been found guilty.
And the publicity, right? I know you said about having to declare it on tenders, but I mean, it's probably going to be all out there in the news already, isn't it? So you've probably already lost before you've even started on a tender or something, which that's a big deal, isn't it, I think? And something people really need to be careful of. And also, just to add a transport aspect to it, you really don't want to end up with a health and safety prosecution, which then you're going to the traffic commissioner for, because whilst the traffic commissioner can't give monetary fines, they can just take away your operator's licence. So then you end up with a massive fine, no operator's licence. Well, that's probably it, isn't it? Business done. It's quite a sorry state of affairs.
I think you're absolutely right there. Sarah, because one of the things I pick up on is that if you have the burden of the HSE investigation, you have the cost of that, you have legal representation with that, you then have to go and represent yourself there with legal representation. You then have to inform the traffic commissioner, who will then want their hearing. You've then got legal representation twice, so second time round for those things. So almost that whole burden is a double whammy for operator licence holders.
Yeah, and they're probably coming at very different times as well. As we know, traffic commissioners, public inquiries come around very, very quickly, like usual 6-week turnaround. HSE prosecutions, they take a lot longer as well, don't they, to finish off and get to the point of conviction. So this can be bumbling along, and it's something that you will be stressed about, I think, and it's going to have a big effect.
The human cost. And actually that rounds me quite nicely onto sort of the final element that we wanted to discuss, is that there's increasingly, with it being health and safety, we've always focused historically on safety very much so, but increasingly we're focusing more on health. Particularly in the fleet and transport sector, we've got known and foreseeable risks, musculoskeletal disorder, breathing challenges, particularly in workshops, welding fumes like we discussed, chemicals, those kinds of things, and then obviously the stress element as well. Without wanting to kind of shoehorn quite a big subject into a small space of time, are you able to just sort of elaborate a bit more on sort of what we're seeing with those?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing an increased focus by HSE and therefore also local authority, environmental health departments, on those areas. As you say, it used to all be about safety. The health is getting much bigger in that. We've seen quite a lot of enforcement action now from HSE in relation to MSDs, so manual handling being the main factor involved there. And we've seen over the last few years, one of HSE's main campaigns has been on respiratory illnesses arising from fumes and construction dust and various particulates. And one of their sort of new campaigns is on this mental health side. We've not seen any enforcement action on the mental health stuff yet. They've gone very much for the sort of softer approach, trying to encourage businesses to look at how they're addressing that at the moment. But certainly we will see if the sort of trend of the physical health side is anything to go by, we will start to see HSE enforcement action in relation to the mental health stuff, and that will probably be focused on rather than sort of outcomes of accidents or specific issues. It will probably be a focus on, have you got the systems in place and the management structure in place to identify what your mental health risks are, identify how to address them, and then actually addressing them and monitoring how you are addressing them.
And you could argue, couldn't you, that in the world we work in transport, that actually you can already pick up some of those risks. Drivers spend an awful lot of time on their own in the vehicle. They might night out all week. They might not see or speak to anybody else. And then they might come to you and say that they're, struggling, and you might wonder why. Well, it actually seems quite obvious when you think about it, doesn't it? So I think it's so important that operators, transport managers, anyone in this sector is really thinking about how they can protect their employees and doing this kind of protection piece sooner rather than later, to make sure that anyone that you think is struggling is getting the help they need. And I think as well that comes down to visibility of transport managers. Are you on site? If every driver goes out at 5 a.m, when do you rock up? Is it 8 o'clock? Do you ever see the drivers before they go out? And have you finished before they've got back? You need to be able to assess how the drivers are doing, and not just by the physical checks that you do and the eyesight checks and things like that, but by acknowledging that the drivers are okay. And just, it's a simple question, isn't it? Are you okay? How are you doing? It's that personal interaction, I think, that's so important, and we're seeing it more and more. And so I think the time to take action is now, before it moves into prosecutions and into the next stages with the HSE.
Definitely. Prevention is better than cure.
It is.
Awesome. And of course, if you're listening and thinking, well, how do we take the next steps? There are courses available through Flagship Partners. So I just thought I'd give myself a little commercial plug there. Thank you very much, James and Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this podcast with you and talk about the sort of introductory side of health and safety. In the next episode, we're going to be focusing much more on transport and workplace transport and the requirements under health and safety law there. So thank you for listening. I hope there's been some real valuable stuff. Sarah and James, really appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us today, and the listeners. And listeners, hope you've enjoyed it. Please do make sure you subscribe and share. See you all on the next one. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.